Marcus tore his loaf in two and handed the larger half to the old woman, and the alley held its breath. He tasted flour and pity and believed the moment was private. He was wrong. At dawn, a soft knock came, too tidy for their tired wooden door. A man in a blue suit, Jonathan Whitaker, held an envelope like a dare and said, "I saw you." Evelyn's needle froze. The room shrank until only the paper and their faces remained. Marcus had given bread. Now the city wanted his story. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. Marcus woke to the smell of street dust and frying oil before he opened his eyes. Morning light found its way through the slats of the old shutter, striping his thin blanket with pale bars. He lay still for a long moment, listening. A distant radio tune, the steady clack of a market stall setting up, someone laughing too loudly across the alley. His stomach made a small, hollow complaint. He smiled at it like an old friend he could not afford to anger. He moved quietly so as not to wake the children who shared the room with him, careful as if the floorboards might crack and spill their little lives into the street. Marcus was 16, but the world called him older, made him that way with years of doing without. His hands were small, dark, and steady. They knew work, carrying crates, washing dishes, running errands. Today, he would deliver 2 loaves to Mrs. Ruth at the corner. Her hands trembled when she counted coins. He would take whatever pay he could and buy a second-hand shirt that had a small tear at the collar. He planned with the thoroughness of someone who lives on the edge of choices. The alley smelled of lemon and smoke. The sun climbed like a cautious promise. Marcus folded his blanket, tucked it into his bag, and stepped out. The city was a patchwork. New glass buildings tried to pretend they were sky. The older houses leaned in, whispering histories no one had time to read. Vendors set out their days on wooden stools. A boy 2 streets over chased a specter of a kite. It fell twice and flew again. Life kept insisting on itself around him. People used to tell Marcus that he had the kindest face for a hard life. Maybe they meant his eyes, large and quick to soften. Maybe they meant his mouth, which could form a joke even when he had nothing to laugh about. He had learned to keep hope small and practical. A loaf shared, a chair offered, a coat handed over. Hope did not have to be grand. It only had to be enough to get through the next afternoon. From the doorway of a diner, an impartial voice might have described Marcus as one of many. A boy like a hinge between past mistakes and possible futures. He was neither hero nor victim in the press and hustle of the morning. He was simply doing the thing he had always done, moving, delivering, keeping his head down. The world was a series of small transactions, and Marcus had become skilled at negotiating them with a patience that felt like quiet courage. He walked to the corner where the old couple sat on a low step, their faces a map of slow years. Peter had hands like the trunk of an old tree, thick fingers, knotted veins. Ruth's hair was the pale gray of winter onion skins. Their clothes were clean but worn. They lived in a sky blue house that leaned forward as if listening to the street. Marcus knew them from the market. They sometimes sold small things, and sometimes they were the last to buy. Today they were waiting with a small bag and eyes that asked for nothing but kindness. Marcus carried 2 loaves because one was for himself. He had tucked a small coin into his palm that morning, a pay for a job done well. His plan had been simple: buy bread, split it for dinner, save the remainder for his mother's rent. Instead, Ruth looked at the bread with a softness that almost hurt. "She hasn't eaten in a day," Peter said, voice thick. His eyes were honest as an open gate. He leaned forward with the sort of dignity poverty could not erase. "It's a cough." He tapped his chest. Marcus saw how small the cough made him. Marcus felt the decision like a weight and a feather at once. He glanced at the loaf near his hip, warm and promising. He thought of his mother's face, lined with worry. He thought of the rent and the light that buzzed at night like an insect in a jar. Yet when Ruth smiled at him, timidity folding into gratitude, Marcus stepped closer and unwrapped his own loaf. The empathy in him wasn't theatrical. It was an old language learned at a kitchen table where plates were always too few. He tore the bread in half and offered the larger piece to Ruth. She shook her head, but Peter took it like a blessing. Marcus accepted the smaller half without fuss. The bread tasted of flour and the warmth of the baker's hands. It filled the hollow place as if for a moment some other hunger had been fed too. The hunger to be useful. An outside voice, cool and observant, might have noted the economy of choices there. Marcus gave up food and kept pride. He paid 1,000 small debts that no ledger recorded. In those half seconds, he negotiated an identity that was not for sale. He could not know then how that single choice would ripple. He could not know the face that watched from the corner of the street. A man in a suit who hid behind an umbrella, though the sun insisted otherwise. As Marcus stepped away, Peter reached into his pocket and pressed a coin into Marcus's palm. The coin was warm from the old man's skin and small as a hope. "Come by tonight," Peter said, voice rough with feeling. "There's soup. Bring your mother." For a moment Marcus saw himself inside the blue house as something more than a passing shadow. He nodded. He didn't see the man in the suit until he was nearly past, until the footage of a life being kept in pockets and careful folds cast a shadow. The man's shoes were too clean for the street. His presence seemed both accidental and deliberate, as if the city had placed him there to measure the day. He watched Marcus with a look that was not pity and not curiosity, exactly. It was more like an equation set to run. The city had its own rhythm of small cruelties and unseen mercies. The radio suddenly sang a chorus that Marcus did not know, and a dog barked twice as if to mark a boundary. Marcus felt a shiver, a tiny alarm bell, then dismissed it. He had less space for fear than for work. There were bills on the table back home, and a mother who kept her worries tucked inside a folded apron. Marcus held steady, as if steadiness could be a shelter. At the bakery window, a faded photograph was taped beneath the list of daily specials. Two boys in short trousers grinned, with a kind of insolent hope only youth can own. Marcus recognized the shape of their smiles. He felt the tug of memory, of being a boy who believed giving was the easiest currency. He wanted to be the kind of man who could keep giving without losing himself. He was not sure yet if the world would let him try. The impartial observer would point out the small sign that marked change. Marcus, by his act of sharing, entered the city's invisible ledger. A name had been noted. Perhaps the man in the suit made a mental note. Perhaps nothing grand would happen. The city did not promise stories. It only collected them. Marcus walked on, carrying the memory of Ruth's smile and the warmth of stale bread. He kept his shoulders loose so the world would not mistake him for someone who had nowhere to go. The gap between who he was and who he might become was a small, pliable thing. It could be shaped by luck, by cruelty, by the kindness of strangers. The morning moved forward like a company of slow drums. Somewhere, a bell rang for the market. Marcus turned the corner toward work. Behind him, the old couple watched until his figure dissolved into the moving crowd. The man in the suit lowered his umbrella and checked something on his phone. He did not follow Marcus, but the city, like water, remembers every stone it passes. The choice Marcus made would echo, in ways he could not yet hear, like a sound under the water. The knock came at a time when knocks meant small things, rent reminders, a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. Marcus was kneading a bit of dough, the simple rhythm steadying him, when the sound made him freeze. Flour dusted his palms like faint snow. He wiped them on his shirt and went to the door, expecting a face he knew. When he opened it, there was a man in a suit so tidy it seemed ironed by sun rays. The suit was dark blue, the kind of blue that made the street look poorer by comparison. He held an umbrella, even though the sky was clear. He held an envelope as if it were a small offering. "Marcus," the man said. His voice was smooth and low. It did not belong to the city's language of bargaining and bark calls. It was the voice of rooms with windows that looked out on far things. Marcus only answered with his name. The man smiled, a careful smile that made the lines near his eyes look deliberate, like a portrait painted to flatter. "My name is Jonathan Whitaker," he said, and he put the envelope into Marcus's hand. The paper was heavy and smelled faintly of something floral and old. On the front was a card with gold letters, Whitaker Foundation. Marcus felt the paper as if it were warm. He did not yet know whether it was a gift or a trap. He glanced toward the narrow table where his mother sat sewing, her fingers working the loop of thread into tiny patient stitches. She looked up and her eyes moved from the envelope to Marcus's face. He could see the question in them. "What is that?" "Mr. Whitaker," his mother asked, polite and guarded. "Can I help you?" "I've come about what you did yesterday," Whitaker said. He did not look at the mother, but at Marcus, steady as a camera. "I saw you at the corner. I saw what you did." His words landed in the room like stones into water, and every surface took the ripple. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He remembered the half-loaf, Ruth's smile, Peter's warm coin. He had thought the moment small, private, a thing to tuck away. He had not imagined a stranger with a suit would make it large enough to find him. "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, but his voice was softer than he meant. Pride tried to speak louder than hunger, but hunger had an honest tone. Whitaker's face softened, but something in his eyes moved like a shadow. "Not just oh," Whitaker said. "I want to offer you something. An opportunity." He folded his hands as if arranging his words. "Not charity, Marcus. A chance. I'm hosting a program tomorrow, scholarships, apprenticeships. We help young people who show character. I think you might be one of them." The word scholarship made Marcus taste metal. His mother's hands paused. The room seemed to narrow, then expand, and Marcus could feel the city pressing at the windows, curious and small. "Why'd me?" he asked. It was a fair question. People sometimes chose the wrong face at random and called it fate. Whitaker's smile slid. "Because I pay attention," he said. "And because sometimes a small thing you do tells me more about a person than a resume could." There was something rehearsed in that sentence, like a line he had delivered many times in boardrooms and on stages. Marcus noticed the slight scar near Whitaker's left eyebrow, a pale line that caught the light and made him seem both human and carefully kept. He noticed, too, that the man's shoes had mud on the soles in a pattern that did not match the neatness of the rest of him. Small contradictions that made the offer less simple. "Come meet me tomorrow at the Whitaker Gallery," Whitaker continued. "Noon. Bring only yourself. Wait, bring your mother, too. I insist." His insistence had a weight that did not feel entirely kind. Marcus's mind flicked to the dinner Peter had promised. He wondered how the old couple would feel about a stranger insisting on his mother's presence. Outside, someone shouted a name. A motorbike rattled by. The ordinary noises kept going, as if nothing had shifted. But inside the room, the envelope pulsed like a second heart. The narrator who sat close to Marcus would tell you about the tremor under his ribs, the old fear of favors wrapped in strings. Marcus remembered promises that came with conditions, of handshakes that closed like cages. He thought of his mother's throat, how she cleared it when she felt obliged, the way she wore worry like a shawl. He knew that help could be a ladder, and he also knew a ladder can serve as a rope. The impartial narrator would mark the scene differently. It would note that the Whitaker Foundation had a reputation for grand gestures and private demands. It would say in careful tones that men like Whitaker liked to find moral tales to headline their philanthropy. It would also mention that the foundation's name had appeared in newspapers for reasons that were sometimes noted and sometimes not. The impartial voice would not accuse. It would hold a list of possibilities like cards on a table. Marcus glanced at the envelope again. The card inside had a neat type. There was a brief note written in a hand that was quick and practiced. We would like to honor your kindness. Please accept our hospitality. No one else knows about this except those you trust. RSVP, Jonathan Whitaker. The line about secrecy felt odd. Marcus felt the small hairs stand up at the back of his neck. Secrets usually belonged to things that were broken. He had learned young and quick that secrets could be soft as silk and sharp as wire. Why keep it secret? He asked, mostly to hear his own voice. Whitaker's face was like a shutter clicking. He did not answer directly. Not all good things are noisy, he said. Some are quiet, so you can hear them. The words could have been comfort, but they sounded like an instruction wrapped in velvet. Outside the window, Peter and Ruth sat on their step, watching. They had come by to thank Marcus for the bread. When they saw the man at his door, their eyes narrowed, the thin lines of age folding into a map of suspicion. Peter stood and lifted his head as if to go warn Marcus, then settled back down. He looked like someone who had seen a storm coming a long way off and knew that running into it would do no good. You should come, Whitaker said, sliding a plan between politeness and command. It can be a beginning. Marcus's mouth felt dry. He imagined the rent being paid, the light staying on for another month, the small patch of warmth that would let his mother sleep without the knots of worry. He also imagined his life being rearranged in ways he had not planned. He imagined having to smile in rooms with carpets that did not know dust, saying words he had not rehearsed, being measured by standards that did not include how many loaves you gave away. For a long moment, he did nothing. The hope and the warning wrestled in him like two children. He thought of Ruth's smile and Mr. Peter's coin, and then of Whitaker's clean watch. He felt like a ledger being opened to a new page. That was the break. The choice had stepped into his day with shoes that did not belong to the alley. The wise voice close to Marcus would tell him to ask questions. They would tell him to take the paper, to accept the invitation, but to carry with him the old sense that nothing is free of cost. The impartial voice would add that Whitaker's ask, bring no one, keep secret, was a sign to measure carefully. Both voices said in different ways the same thing. This was a doorway. Every doorway has a threshold. Marcus folded the envelope back into his palm. He looked at his mother. Her nails were smudged with thread. Her eyes were tired but steady. He wanted to keep that steadiness, to shield it from the polished hands that offered change. All right, he heard himself say. We'll come. Whitaker's smile widened like a curtain being drawn, as if the man had expected this answer. He left with a small bow and a final word that sat like a stone in the doorway. Bring nothing but your heart. As the door closed, the room seemed to inhale. The city outside did not stop, but Marcus's life changed its measure. A new calendar had been set, a meeting that might be the start of something or the first step into a web. The old couple watched until Whitaker's umbrella disappeared down the street. Peter folded his hands over his knees like a man who had placed a wager and waited. Later, when the sun had tilted and the dough had risen, Marcus would think about the way Whitaker's watch caught the light, about the mud on his soles, about the way he had asked for silence. He would feel the hum of something that might be kindness or might be design. The city, impartial and hungry, kept both options in its long pockets. Marcus kept his heart in his hand and waited for tomorrow to arrive. Marcus kept the envelope folded in his pocket like a living thing. It warmed against the skin over his heart and made him walk a little straighter and a little more careful at the same time. The day moved around him, market cries, the clink of metal, the smell of frying plantain. But inside his chest a different rhythm owned him. Curiosity, worry, and a small, stubborn hope. At the bakery, Samuel wiped his hands on his apron and looked at Marcus with the kind of slow appraisal that only people who have worked with someone for years can give. Samuel was broad-shouldered and loud in a way that could be comforting. You look like a man who's stolen his luck, he said, joking, but his eyes asked a question. He had seen Marcus grow from a skinny helper to the steady young man who opened the ovens at dawn. It's an invitation, that's all, Marcus said. He did not tell Samuel everything. He didn't tell him about Whitaker's smile or the instruction to keep the meeting quiet. Secrets were strange weights. They needed to be balanced against what you already carried. Samuel leaned close. "You going to be careful. Men with clean shoes don't always have clean hearts." His tone was blunt but affectionate. Marcus nodded. Samuel had a way of saying things that reminded Marcus of the simple ledger of the world. Favor, cost. The ledger had margins where people wrote invisible prices. Outside the shop, Daniel waited with 2 glasses of chai. Daniel was Marcus's age and his neighbor. They had raced each other home from the market when they were boys and pushed carts together. Daniel's family could never quite keep its bills in line, and sometimes envy sat on his shoulders like a second coat. He handed Marcus a glass. "So, is he from one of those places with big names and little trust?" Daniel asked. He tried to smile, but his fingers tightened on the cup. Marcus told Daniel the basics. Daniel's jaw set. "Bring your mother," he said, repeating Whitaker's words, as if they were the last line in a play. "Why bring her? That sounds like a show." Daniel's suspicion warmed into anger. "What if it's not for you, Marcus? What if it's for them to feel good about themselves?" Marcus understood the fear. He had learned how swiftly compliments can turn into demands. The city taught you to take a compliment and check the price tag. He drank his chai slowly. The heat steadied him. That evening, when Marcus told Evelyn, his mother, she paused in the middle of a seam. The needle hung from her hand like a tiny, suspended truth. Evelyn's face had the kind of map worry draws. Lines around the mouth, a stubborn crease between the brows. She set the fabric down and looked at the envelope. Evelyn. Marcus said the name like a prayer and a shield. He said he saw me give the bread. He asked us to come to his gallery. He said it's for people who show character. Evelyn's hands moved before her voice. She smoothed the cloth, then folded her fingers into her lap. For a long moment, she did not speak. The room hummed, the radio on the shelf, the buzz of a mosquito's wing. The air was thick with the smell of sewing oil and onions. "I know that name," she said finally softly. The words were small, but they carried something heavy. Marcus's stomach dropped. "You know him?" Evelyn's eyes went to the window, as if the answer might arrive from the street. "Many years ago," she said. "I worked for the Whitakers, Mrs. Whitaker, at the old house by the river. I looked after their children sometimes. I sewed, I cleaned." Her voice held the steady cadence of someone retelling a memory that was both ordinary and sharp. Marcus had not expected history. His life had been a series of present needs. The past lived in photographs in the bakery or in stories told by neighbors. He had never imagined his mother's past would have doors that opened into the kind of world Whitaker came from. Evelyn touched the envelope with the tip of one finger, as if testing whether paper could hold years. "It was a long time ago," she said. "I left because of things that happened. Promises broken. The sort of quiet that says leave and means never ask why." Marcus felt something shift then, an electric thread of fear and protection. He could feel his loyalty sharpen like a blade. "You never told me," he said. "I kept it to protect you." Evelyn's voice did not rise. "I did not want my past to become your burden." She folded her hands tighter. "But I know that watch. I kept a small memory. People with power make kindness look like a choice. They can also move like storms." The impartial voice would record this as a complication any observer could have predicted. When someone from the past reappears, the scales tip. Marcus was no longer deciding only for himself. He remembered the way Evelyn would wake at night, walk to the window, and look at the distant lights, as if counting what she had left behind. There were things she had not said, because she believed some doors should stay closed. Across the lane, Peter and Ruth came that evening with a tin of soup and the look of people who had been given and wanted to give. When Marcus told them about Whitaker, Peter folded his hands and made a face that said he had seen this before. Ruth reached for Marcus's sleeve and squeezed. "Be careful, child," she said, each word a bead of worry. Peter's suspicion grew into something more specific. He told Marcus, in a low voice, about rumors he'd heard at the market. The Whitaker Foundation had been generous, yes, but only in ways that made Whitaker look generous. "They use stories," Peter said. "They choose a single act, make it into a banner, and then the rest of us are left to live under the weight of being grateful." His hands were steady, but his eyes looked like pitch-dark pools. They ask things of people afterward, sometimes things that hurt. The thought sat heavy between them. Marcus tried to imagine what Whitaker might ask. Public appearances? A stage speech? Or something worse, a favor, a silence, a role in a narrative Marcus did not write. That night Marcus could not sleep. He thought about Whitaker's request to bring only your heart, the odd insistence on secrecy, and his mother's quiet warning. He thought of Samuel's blunt advice and Daniel's jealous fear. He felt the web of other people's lives tightening around his choice. In the small hours, he rose and walked the lane. The sky was a black cloth, and the street lamps threw rings on the pavement that looked like moons on the water. He stopped at the blue house, where Peter and Ruth sat with 2 cups of tea between them and an unspoken wish for his safety. "I will go," Marcus said, to the night and to himself and to everyone who had given him pieces of courage. "But I will ask questions. I will not be a part of any story that swallows us." The compassionate narrator leaned in and felt for Marcus, felt the way responsibility and hope had braided together into something almost sacred. The impartial voice took notes. Conditions form a line of defense. Negotiation is a kind of armor. So Marcus made his map. He would go to the gallery, but he would watch. He would not let the promise of a ladder blind him to what might be tied to its rungs. He would bring Evelyn because Whitaker had asked it, but he would insist on clarity. He would not come alone in truth, even if Whitaker had asked for secrecy. He would carry the voices of Samuel, Daniel, Peter, and Ruth inside him. They were his counsel. Unsaid in the room was another thread of tension. Daniel's envy had become a small, hot coin rattling in his pocket. He wanted what Marcus might receive. In a darker corner of that want, possibility twisted into a different shape. Desire can be a quiet thing until it meets an opportunity, and then it becomes a player. By the time dawn broke, Marcus's plan had edges. He would keep his heart, as Whitaker had asked, but he would not hand over his mind. He would ask who else was chosen. He would ask what was expected, and he would watch the hands that offered help. Hands are never just hands. They carry a history. The day before the meeting stretched ahead like an empty page. In its blankness lived the risk and the hope. Everyone who loved Marcus felt the ripple. Evelyn smoothed a patch of cloth as if to iron out worry. Samuel closed the bakery a little earlier and left a loaf for the old couple. Peter checked his pockets for extra coins. Daniel walked the lane with a face that tried too hard to look calm. Marcus folded and refolded his resolve. The city kept breathing around him, but the air inside his small circle had a new current. The invitation had become a test. The Whitaker Gallery felt like stepping into another weather. Outside, the city hummed with heat and dust. Inside, the air was cool and edged with a soft perfume of expensive things. Paintings hung like quiet people, and light fell in perfect rectangles across marble. Marcus felt his feet small on the polished floor. He had never been in a room that whispered rather than shouted. They led him and Evelyn into a room that looked out to the river, where glass windows turned the day into a slow, private show. Jonathan Whitaker stood near a sculpture, tall, white, as if someone had tried to fold a cloud into a shape. He wore the same tidy suit, umbrella resting like a cane by his side. But now there were other presences. A few cameras tucked on tripods, faces with notepads, a young woman with a microphone who smiled too widely. Marcus realized in a slow spread of cold that the invitation had been wider than he thought. Surprises, Whitaker said, as if it explained everything. Marcus's mouth worked. He had imagined a quiet meeting, an honest talk. He had not imagined an audience. A screen flickered on the wall, and the room quieted. On it, a simple shot of the corner where Peter and Ruth sat unrolled. Grainy real. The camera found Marcus carrying 2 loaves. The footage was the same small miracle he had lived, but strange through a lens. Smaller, larger, already crafted. They filmed you. Marcus breathed. The sound of his own voice was foreign in the room. Whitaker's smile sharpened. We have people who look for kindness, he said. We document it. We celebrate it. Stories are the engine of change. He turned to the crowd as if to deliver a sermon. Marcus Williams. A small act. A great heart. Today, we want to recognize that heart. The applause was polite and practiced. Marcus felt the warmth of shame rise in his face. He had never sought applause. He had sought bread. Evelyn's hand was an anchor on his sleeve. Her face had gone pale, a paper map bereft of ink. Marcus looked at her and saw the shadow of memory flutter across her features. He noticed then that Whitaker's eyes lingered on her a beat too long. And who brought us this footage? Whitaker asked, as if asking for a name at a christening. A young man stepped forward, Daniel. Marcus felt the world tilt. Daniel's hand was trembling where it clasped a small envelope. The gallery murmured as if a wind had passed through. Daniel's smile was thin. He started, voice small for the room. I saw him. I filmed it on my phone. I sent it. Mr. Whitaker asked if I could help bring more stories like it. Heat flushed Marcus's neck. He remembered laughing with Daniel over chai, racing him home, sharing the same dusty air. He had not expected that same air to carry the thing that would wrap him in lights. Daniel stood as if trying to be brave. Some of the faces in the room nodded at him like they were welcoming an informant. Whitaker stepped forward and gave Daniel a small envelope that flashed in a way that looked like money. For your contribution, he said lightly. We reward civic vigilance. Betrayal is a slow fall, not a single crack. Marcus felt it like a stone sinking in his chest. The scene that had been private, his hand tearing bread, Ruth's grateful face, Peter's coin, had been made into a product and sold. Someone he called friend had been the first salesperson. The compassionate voice that had narrated Marcus's heart whispered in his ear, asking why it hurt so much. The impartial voice cataloged the moment precisely. Envy can become transaction. Familiarity can become currency. Both voices agreed on one thing. Marcus had been moved without his consent. Was it you, Daniel? Marcus asked, quiet, the words blunt as a blade. The gallery seemed to close in, every breath thickening. Daniel's eyes dropped. I needed cash. My mum, he tried to speak of household bills, of small things that shape-shift into large decisions, but the explanations were paper-thin in that room. I thought it would help. I thought they would do something good with it. Evelyn let out a sound that was part laugh, part cry. She released Marcus's sleeve and leaned forward until her hands found the back of a chair. You sold him, she said, steadier than Marcus expected. You sold what was ours. There was a murmur in the crowd, the soft shuffle of sympathy and curiosity vying for space. Whitaker took up the narrative like a conductor. We offer opportunities, yes, he said. And part of our program is telling stories. We need true moments. We pay those who help us find them. Daniel helped us today. We honor that. He turned to Marcus with an expression that tried to be tender. And we want to help you. A scholarship. Work with our foundation. A platform. It was the word platform that landed like a new weight. Marcus imagined posters with his face, speeches where he would nod and say the things the cameras expected. He imagined his mother's name on the side, said by someone whose lips had never known the smell of onions frying at dusk. The offer gleamed like a coin tossed at his feet. "What do you want in return?" Marcus asked, because the ledger in his head required that every favor be balanced. Whitaker's answer was smooth as silk. "We ask for your consent to use your story. A release form, that's all. It helps us raise funds, Marcus. It helps us show the world what courage looks like." He smiled. "You'll inspire others. But a release is not always small. The paper on which consent is written can be a map to a cage." Marcus felt the history in Evelyn's hand fold into something sharp. He thought of the sentence in Whitaker's note, "No one else knows about this except those you trust." He thought of the earlier request to bring only your heart. Now the heart would be on display. Daniel's betrayal had changed the terms of trust in Marcus's life. The intimacy of offering, of giving up his meal, had been turned into a spectacle. He felt used, though not entirely naive to the temptation. He could imagine rent paid, food on the table, his mother's shoulders eased. The offer was a bright and dangerous thing. Evelyn watched him like a woman watching the tide. "You must read," she said quietly. "Every line is a net." Her voice was both mother and old seamstress. Careful fingers tracing the edges of possibility. "They will make a story about you and ask that you act it out." Daniel's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he said. Marcus heard the apology as both sentence and silence. He felt the better parts of Daniel, the boy who raised him as a child, mixed with the shame of the man who needed quick coins. The betrayal was not black and white. It was threaded like old cloth. Whitaker, seeing the fracture, leaned in with the kind smile of a man quick to patch public knots. "Marcus," he said softly, "we can do so much for you. Think of the opportunities. Think of your mother's peace." The room waited. The cameras waited. Marcus stood between two futures, one that could ease their small daily hunger, the other that asked him to step into a story written by someone else. He felt the quiet ache of being chosen and the raw ache of being used. As the first twist settled into the room like dusk, an unknown thing loosened and fell away. Secrecy. The private act had been opened. The man in the suit had not simply seen. Someone near to Marcus had sold the moment. The city, which always kept a ledger in the margins, had traded his kindness for a headline. Marcus's hands clenched and loosened. He loved Daniel in the simple way of shared memories. He hated him in the simpler way of being betrayed. Evelyn's eyes met his and held a question without words. Outside, the river moved, indifferent. Inside, the gallery felt smaller, its light colder. The compassionate narrator leaned forward, feeling Marcus's shame and the small bright thread of his need. The impartial voice made a note. Decisions born under these lights change people. What looked like help could be a thin coat over an old debt. Marcus nodded once, slow and careful. "I will not be spectacle," he said. The words sounded like a promise he had made to himself and to the bread he had given. Not for free. Whitaker's smile flickered and the room shifted. Cameras adjusted. Daniel's apology hung like a thin veil. The first twist, like a cutting cloth, revealed a new pattern. Generosity could be purchased, and those you trusted could be the first to price you. Marcus stepped back from the circle of light and held his mother's hand. The path ahead had sharpened edges he had not expected. The days after the gallery felt like living inside a drum. Every sound louder, tighter. Word moved fast. A neighbor who had seen Daniel's clip told two others, and soon people at the market knew Marcus had been discovered. The bakery filled with low whispers. Samuel's hands worked the dough with new care, as if kneading could press the world back into shape. Marcus moved through the small tornado of attention and tried to keep his feet planted. Whitaker's people called twice a day. Each call was polite, careful, and patient in a way that made patience feel like a demand. They emailed release forms with neat legal language. They offered transport, stylists, and a publicist. The foundation's letters smelled faintly of lemon and ink. Marcus kept the papers in a drawer and did not open them. The envelope stayed where it had been given, a compass pointing toward a decision he did not want to make. The city's curiosity was an animal that wanted feeding. Cameras lingered at the corner where Peter and Ruth sat. Strangers would stop and ask Marcus where he had been raised, what had taught him to give. Some asked with earnest eyes. Some asked like vultures wearing sympathy. The attention made Evelyn shrink and swell at once, pride flickering against a tighter, more private fear. At night, the rent notice crept from mattress to table like a shadow. Evelyn's cough that had been small at first had grown into a voice that woke her in the early hours. Marcus would sit up with her, pressing a cool hand to her brow, as if he could press away the debt. Money leaned over them like a storm cloud. "They want you to sign," Samuel said one afternoon, sliding a loaf across the counter, as if gifts could smooth the edges of advice. "Not all that glitters is gold, boy. But I know hunger. If it feeds your mother for a month, that's something." Daniel's silence was heavier than before. He stopped coming by for chai. When he did appear, he looked like a man who had been in the sun too long, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders hunched. He had taken the envelope from Whitaker and folded it until the creases looked like scars. Whitaker had offered him a small payment and then a chance to intern for the foundation. Daniel accepted, in part because he could not refuse what he had set in motion. The foundation's offer wrapped gratitude and obligation together, so tight even Daniel could not tell which was which. Marcus struggled in a place where moral choices collided with practical ones. He thought of the offer, money enough to clear the rent, work that could lead to a steady wage, someone to say his name in rooms where doors stayed shut to boys like him. He thought of the camera lights making his mother's cough smaller, softer, less important to a world that preferred a tidy story. He thought of Daniel, not yet a villain, but a man who had traded a private kindness for spectacle. At night, Marcus sat on the roof and listened. The river made a distant hush. The city's light looked like a spread of coins, small, bright. The narrator near him leaned close and felt the tug. Choose bread now, or choose dignity later. The impartial voice listed consequences. Sign, and the world will shape your name. Refuse, and the world will shape your story without your voice. Both voices said the truth. Either choice would change them. Pressure found other doors. A reporter called Samuel at the bakery and offered to run a human interest piece about Marcus. "We'll pay a small fee," she said, voice warm. "It will help with rent." Samuel shut the call off and looked at Marcus. "They want you to stand on a stage," he said. "They want you to say what makes a hero." Samuel's eyes were full of the tired wisdom of someone who knew stories could be used to build altars or prisons. Evelyn's past shifted slightly in the room like a loose tile. She grew more silent when reporters came near, remembering how the Whitakers' world had once smelled of polished wood and cold fruit. She had left that life with a small suitcase and 2 bruises she never spoke of. Whitaker's name was a key that fit locks she had long avoided. She watched the cloak of help come nearer and shivered. One evening, after a day when the cameras had circled the corner like gulls, Marcus found a note slipped under his door. No signature. "It will be easier to help if you cooperate," it said. The paper smelled faintly of the gallery's lemon ink. The message was small and sharp as a needle. Marcus held it until the city blurred and he felt the cold press against his fingers. Fear arrived in small packages. Samuel barred him from being alone with big decisions. Peter and Ruth offered extra tins of soup, but spoke in clipped sentences about being careful of men who look like benefactors. Daniel, when he did come, kept his head down and offered small apologies that tasted like pennies. Whitaker, in the meantime, sent a letter more carefully written than the last. It mentioned partnership and visibility. It praised Marcus for embodying values. There was an inked line that read, "Signing the release would allow us to deploy your story for greater good. The good promise was vague, the kind of good that sounded like a horizon. Marcus read the sentence over and over, thinking that greater good often arrived with small, precise costs. Then the landlord came. He was not a cruel man by design, only by need. His shoes thumped on their floorboards as he delivered the news that the electricity would be cut if the arrears were not paid. Evelyn's hands shook as she typed missed calls into a phone without answers. Marcus felt anger and shame braid into a single thing. That night, with the lights buzzing low, Marcus found Daniel on the step outside, under the thin moon. He had dirt on his hands from some delivery job and a paper cup that smelled of cheap coffee. "I'm sorry," Daniel said again, earnest and raw. "I thought it was small. I thought it would help. I didn't know they'd bring cameras. I didn't know they'd make our lives pop like toys." Marcus looked at him. The betrayal had a shape, but so did the need. "Why did you send it?" Marcus asked. Daniel swallowed. "I needed money for my sister's medicine. My mom cried every night. I promised her I'd fix it. Whitaker said he'd help. He gave me something small and a job. I thought if I helped, I could get more. I wanted to be useful." The admissions did not heal the cut, but they added color to the hurt, a depth that made revenge feel wrong and forgiveness complicated. Marcus sat with the conflict, feeling the weight of both choice and mercy. As the days narrowed toward the final deadline Whitaker had set for a decision, Marcus found the world pressing in. The gallery scheduled a public celebration and offered Evelyn a stage seat in the front row with soft lighting. Whitaker's assistant called to say that the foundation would cover 1 month's rent if Marcus signed on that day. The offer landed like a gentle but sharp ultimatum. Sign now, and the electricity stays on. Refuse, and continue the slow grind of survival. In the silence between the phone's clicks, Marcus heard the city's pulse like a judge's gavel. He thought of the bread in Peter's hands, of Ruth's grateful smile, of Evelyn's steady lips when she refused to tell all her past out of shame and protection. He thought of Daniel's pleading eyes. He thought of Samuel's flat stare and Peter's muttered warnings. He thought of the note slipped under his door and the nameless voice that insisted cooperation made things easier. In the end, the largest pressure of all was not money or cameras, but the shape of love. Marcus had to decide whether to let other people tell his story for him, or to keep the story private and risk the pain he could not remove. The city waited, patient and hungry. The narrator near him felt the tremor of what he would choose. The impartial voice simply marked that a choice had to be made. Silence pressed down, heavy as a lid, and Marcus held the paper release in his hands like a small, decisive thing. The gallery lights felt like noon in a small country, too bright, too honest. The room hummed with expectation. Cameras on tripods, microphones leaning like curious insects, a small stage where a single chair waited, as if for a confession. Marcus stood near the back, Evelyn at his side, hands folded so tight the knuckles whitened. Daniel lingered by the doorway, face flushed, eyes avoiding cameras. Samuel, Peter, and Ruth clustered in a hush at the edge of the crowd like weathered flags. Jonathan Whitaker moved through the room with a practiced calm. He spoke in the low, soft voice people use when they are used to shaping rooms. Today, he said, we honor a small kindness and the young man who showed it. Marcus Williams reminds us what we can be. The applause that followed was polite and measured. A woman with a notebook smiled at Marcus as if she already knew what he should say. Marcus could feel the lights on his skin like a tide. The release form lay on the small table beside the chair. Neat type, a line for a signature. He thought of the rent notice, the landlord's thump, Evelyn's cough, and the note slid under his door demanding cooperation. He thought of Daniel's pale apology. He thought of the warm coin Peter had pressed into his palm. Standing there, the weight of small lives pressed against his ribs. The empathetic voice that lived with Marcus wanted him to step up and take the safety the signature promised. It whispered of sleeping through a month without worry, of Evelyn's cough treated, of light that would not go out. The impartial voice listed the costs. A story not his to sell, a past framed by strangers. Both voices argued, both were true. Whitaker gestured for Marcus to come forward. "Tell them what you felt," he said, gentle as a bridle. "Tell them what made you choose to give." The cameras leaned forward. Marcus could have told the simple truth. Hunger, the feel of Ruth's smile, the economy of a small life. He could have said, "I gave because I could." But there is a difference between saying something and having it be shaped into applause. Before Marcus could move, a man's voice cut the room like a single sharp note. "Excuse me." A journalist from the back pushed forward, face set. She held a small recorder and a stack of papers. "We need to say something else." The murmurs rolled like a sudden wind. Whitaker's face barely tightened. "This is a celebration," he said smooth. "We have a program." The reporter looked at Whitaker and then at the crowd. "We have documents," she said. "We have receipts and emails that show payment to content scouts to find marketable kindness, and an internal memo about using stories for reputation management." She tapped the stack. "We also have a witness who heard Mr. Whitaker instruct staff to keep sensitive histories quiet." The room shifted. The neat air tasted suddenly like metal. Whitaker's smile thinned. "This is—" He stopped because the recorder kept moving, because witnesses had faces, because a live camera will not let rehearsed speeches breathe. The second twist struck then, quick and personal. Evelyn stepped forward. The gallery, which had been a place of polished surfaces and polite questions, felt suddenly like a kitchen in which a long-simmered truth had boiled over. Her voice, when it came, was quiet at first, but threaded with an uncontainable strength. "I kept quiet for 30 years, she said. She looked at Whitaker, as if she were reading the name carved into an old door. "I left the Whitaker house because they broke promises. They asked me to look away. I saw things no woman should have to see. I kept your secrets to protect my children. I will not protect them any longer." Her hands did not shake. Those in the room who had expected a neat story, for Whitaker, for Marcus, felt their breath catch. Whitaker's face turned a color that was almost a bruise. He had the air of someone whose careful life had been punctured. "Evelyn," he began, the word a plucked string. Evelyn did not stop. "You paid boys to find moments, and then sold those moments to clean your name. You asked women to be silent so your family could keep its image. You promised safety and delivered a ledger." Her eyes found Marcus and then Daniel. "You made my life into a story and expected me to bow." The impartial voice recorded clean facts, while the empathetic voice felt every small thing collapse. A mother's memory, a foundation's performance, a community's trust. Daniel's head dropped, his hands covering his face for a second before he pulled them away, horror on his features. He had not known the whole of it. He had only known his own needs. Now that need has collided with history. Whitaker's staff moved subtly toward him, a ring of neat people. Whitaker's mouth opened and closed. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "We tell stories to inspire. We have paperwork in order." The journalist was not done. She played a short recording, a grainy file where a man with Whitaker's measured cadence spoke to a staffer about controlling the narrative and keeping certain files private. The microphone caught the words. In the recording, Whitaker did not sound like a philanthropist. He sounded like a man who had practiced damage control for years. The room exhaled. Cameras flashed not with the soft glow of celebration, but with the sharpness of exposure. Some faces in the crowd moved from curiosity to anger. The polite applause was gone. Whitaker, realizing the tide had turned, tried a different tact. "We have helped many people," he said. "We can help Marcus. Sign, and you will have resources. Refuse, and this energy will be wasted." Marcus felt the old ledger open again. He could sign, and the immediate storm would pass. Evelyn's cough might be treated, the lights would stay on. He could refuse, and perhaps the foundation's practice would be revealed, and those like Evelyn would be heard. He could take comfort for a month, or he could choose a longer, harder path that might protect others. Daniel stepped forward then, raw and small. "I filmed him," he said. His voice surprised even himself by where it landed, not on an excuse, but on a confession. "I sent it because I thought it would help my family. Mr. Whitaker paid me. He told me I was doing a good thing." Daniel looked at Whitaker like a child accusing a father. "He told me to keep quiet about how the footage would be used." Daniel's betrayal had been the first cut. Now, standing honest, he made an offering of truth. He handed the small envelope Whitaker had given him to the journalist. She opened it. Inside, a single folded note and a slip of cash. The crowd saw the paper, read the small words, "For Scouts," and the small cash as if a curtain had dropped. Whitaker's composure cracked. People in the room shouted questions. The foundation's director, who had been quiet until then, stammered that internal reviews would happen, that they would cooperate. But the voice of the man who had spent a lifetime arranging his world for appearances cracked in front of those he thought he could shape. Marcus felt the hot shape of release form in his pocket like a coin. He took it out and did something no one expected. He walked to the small stage, set the paper down without signing, and turned to the camera. "You can make my life into a story," he said, voice steady like it would struck by a hammer. "But you cannot make me a thing to be traded. If this foundation wants to help, do it openly. Fund the clinic by the river. Pay the rent on every home where light is about to go out. Do not use our hunger to clean your name." His words landed and hung. Evelyn's chest heaved with something like relief. Daniel's shoulders shuddered with grieving and relief. Whitaker's face had emptied into an old, thin panic. In that moment the room was not a gallery, but a courtroom of conscience. The journalist closed her recorder. Cameras recorded every turn of faces. Whitaker tried one last maneuver, legal threats, offers, the bright bait of a covered month. But the evidence was splashed across every lens. People in the crowd, neighbors, market sellers, those who had once believed in the Whitakers, started to speak, telling small stories Whitaker could not control. Security moved, but their steps were slower than the crowd's shifting mood. The director whispered into a phone. Whitaker finally lowered his head. The man who had asked Marcus to bring only your heart looked suddenly very mortal. After the room emptied into the dusk like a flock scattered, people did not rush to Marcus for selfies. They brought soup and blankets. Samuel put a hand on Marcus's shoulder and said nothing. Peter handed a small envelope of coins to Evelyn and refused to meet Whitaker's reporter when she offered a card. Daniel stayed by Marcus's side, wanting to be forgiven and not knowing exactly how to earn it. The impartial voice noted consequences. Whitaker's foundation would face scrutiny. Contracts would be questioned. Some doors that had been opened by stories would be closed. The empathetic voice tracked softer things. Evelyn's courage, Marcus's refusal, the slow making of a different kind of safety, one built by community, not spectacle. That night, in the small room with the slatted shutter, Marcus and Evelyn sat by the window. The city's lights were a scatter of distant stars. Daniel knocked and came in, hands empty but honest. He sat and said, "I'm sorry," again, and this time the words were ballast. Evelyn took Daniel's hand. "If you want to help," she said, "help your neighbor. Help the clinic. Help us be louder in the right way." Marcus watched the exchange and felt a weary, cleansing grief and a small, stubborn lift of hope. They had not won everything. The rent was not yet paid, and Whitaker's power still had teeth. But the lie had been called, a secret turned to light, and a community had begun to gather its strength not from applause, but from each other. Marcus had refused to be sold, and in that refusal he found a new kind of shelter, one stitched from truth. The days after the gallery unfolded in a slow, honest way. The city's gossip turned into action. Neighbors who had once watched from doorways stood in lines at the little clinic by the river, not for cameras, but for stitches, for cough syrup, for quiet talks with the nurse who had stayed late because she believed someone was finally listening. The reporter who had played the recording stayed in touch. Her articles did not shout about a single boy, but printed the full story: Evelyn's secret, Daniel's confession, the Foundation's memos. People read, and then looked up from their cups with a new kind of watchfulness. Whitaker's name did not vanish. It collected edges of anger and questions. There were calls for audits, and a small group of lawyers asked for documents. The Foundation's board called emergency meetings. Jonathan Whitaker appeared on a morning show with a speech that sounded smooth as ever, but the words hit like thin glass against the city's new attention. Some donors pulled back. The gallery changed security and issued a statement that promised internal reviews. It was not a neat justice, but it was public, and that made a difference. For Marcus, the change came not in headlines, but at the kitchen table. People from the neighborhood, Samuel, Peter, Ruth, even the woman who sold onion slices, brought envelopes and casseroles. The reporter's readers had started a small fund. A local church collected donations, and a small clinic agreed to treat Evelyn without charge for a time. The landlord received a check that covered 1 month's arrears. It was enough to keep the lights on and buy medicine. Marcus felt a relief, like a hand lifted from his chest. He wondered many times and in many small ways whether he had done the right thing by refusing Whitaker's offer on stage. He could have signed and helped his mother immediately. Steady work, a month of rent, a cleaner life for a while. But he thought of Evelyn's story and how the Whitakers had once asked her to be quiet. He thought of the cameras that turned people into pictures, and of Daniel's red face when he told the truth. Marcus had been torn between saving the morning and saving the future. The choice he made had been less about him and more about the others who had no voice. Daniel worked hard to repair what he had broken. He did not make grand gestures. He stood up earlier and went to small jobs, delivering for the baker, helping with heavy crates at the market. He spent his free hours at the clinic, carrying boxes and sweeping floors. When he could, he sat with Marcus and listened to him speak quietly about dignity and demands. The two of them sat on the roof one night, looking at the city's coin-like lights, and Daniel said, "I thought help came with a stamp. I didn't think it would cost us our privacy." Marcus answered, "We all make mistakes when we are hungry. What's important is what we make after." Evelyn, who had gone into the gallery with her thorax full of old silences, found herself speaking to small groups. She did not become loud. She became steady, the way a river is steady. People came to her kitchen for mending and for advice. She sewed not only clothes, but small banners for a community board where people could share resources and warnings. Her voice, once folded against storms, began to teach others how to hold their stories without letting them be sold. There were times Marcus felt the tug of bitterness. He would see a camera flash, and his stomach would clench. He would remember the warmth of the bread and the coldness of an audience. He would remember Daniel's hands and Whitaker's watch. But those moments passed. They were edged and real, not the kind of rage that swallows a man. He let himself feel them, and then let them move through him like rainwater down a gutter. The community's response made Marcus think about how help should work. He watched neighbors trade time and skill. Samuel offered baking lessons twice a week and asked for no money. Peter and Ruth hosted a small food table on market days. Daniel organized a rota to take elderly neighbors to the clinic. The reporter organized a fundraiser that raised more than the month's rent. The extra went into a small fund managed by people from the neighborhood to pay for medicine and small repairs. Marcus realized the support that came from many hands felt different, less like a stage and more like a net. He also watched how power tried to repair itself. Whitaker's lawyers wrote letters. His publicists sent carefully worded apologies. He offered donations to causes with the foundation's name attached. Some of that money reached good people and did good work. But Marcus learned to listen for the quiet lines beneath those gifts. He learned to ask who decides which stories become loud and which struggles stay private. He learned that sometimes help must be refashioned into something that does not require a person to be shown as proof. One morning, a month after the gallery, Marcus sat on the step outside the Blue House. The air was bright and light. Evelyn mended a shirt in sunlight, her hands quick and calm. Daniel came by with 2 cups of tea and set one on Marcus's knee. He did not beg for absolution. He offered steady work and steady presence. Samuel walked past and clapped Marcus on the back. A small boy chased a kite, and it fell and flew and fell again, unbothered by the shadow of bigger things. Marcus thought back to the loaf of bread he had given. He thought of the simple economy of the act and how complicated the consequence had become. He felt deeply the lesson life had carved into him, that kindness itself is always worth doing, but that kindness given in a world full of cameras and contracts must be guarded by truth. He made one decision then, clean and small. He would not hide from kindness, nor would he allow its image to be used to hide injustice. The attention that had found him would be used, he decided, to help the neighbors who had little voice. If people wanted to give, he would make sure the giving paid for medicine, for rent, for care, not for glossy portraits or empty speeches. So Marcus began to speak, not behind a microphone for a polished gallery, but in market lanes and at the clinic and in small meetings with neighbors. He told the simple story of the bread and the couple and the coin, and then he urged listeners to look longer. Look at who holds power and how it is used. He spoke of forgiveness and accountability. He said true gratitude is not a thing to be bought. It is work to be done together. The moral weight of his choice did not leave him unmarked. There were nights when question and doubt were his only companions. Would he be harder, he sometimes asked himself, if the lights went out? Would he choose differently if the decision had to be made again under the press of hunger? He did not pretend to be certain. He allowed the questions to be part of him. They sharpened his judgment without hardening his heart. In time, Whitaker's foundation survived but changed. It had to answer to people it had not expected to answer to. Some of its board members resigned. Others stayed and promised reforms. Jonathan Whitaker gave an interview that sounded like an apology, but read like a man learning the edges of his own power. The gallery kept its doors open, but its exhibitions now included talks about ethics and community. Whether that would last, only time could tell. What remained steady in Marcus's life was not fame or a signed contract. It was a roof over Evelyn's head, light that did not buzz its final last hum, a small fund that bought pills and patched holes, and the knowledge that people could come together to make real change without being filmed. He had traded a single stage for many small ones, messy and honest. On a quiet evening, Marcus sat with Evelyn and Daniel on the roof. The night folded around them like a blanket. He thought of the 2 twists and the 1 betrayal, how they had carved the shape of their days. He felt gratitude for the way truth had come out and sadness for the cost of learning it. He felt love for Daniel in his imperfect apology and for Evelyn in her quiet courage. He felt the steady, simple pride of someone who had held to a kind of dignity in a world that often forgets it. And he understood, finally, that moral choices are not puzzles solved once and for all. They are paths walked every day. He could not fix everything with a speech or a refusal. He could, however, keep choosing the small things that built a different ledger, one in which kindness did not require a price tag, and where people could be helped without being sold. That was enough to sleep on, sometimes, and sometimes it was everything. So, tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.